It's so good to be here with you. My whole introduction is ruined. Here I was wishing the time, I wish I could talk about the seasons of life, and Mary Morey did that. Just to say the different seasons that I've been through, I've also reached AOV age 67, so no retirement in the kingdom of God. But in the different seasons and looking back, it is good to know you're all going to hit a wall at some time. And God is there. And those are sometimes periods of our greatest growth, or periods of transformation. Seasons where we're hardly able to pray, but yet God comes to us in such beautiful ways. And 6 years ago, I hit that wall. I couldn't go on anymore. But that was the beginning of a season of real transformation and intimacy with God. And I had formed through the years these intimate friendships and allies. We knew each other's story, and we could be there to support one another. And it fills my heart with such great joy to see this community thriving and growing with new faces and old faces, together forming these living stones. You've persevered, you've hung on to the living God, and He's been faithful. We have much to be grateful for. And the time of COVID was difficult, and a lot of communities didn't make it. But by the grace of God, we're here, we're thriving. So if you've been here with us these last 4 weeks, we've been in this series called Grow. And we've been talking about what is this Christian life all about? This lifelong transformational journey where we're longing to grow into love and maturity, to be the people we're created to be. And this journey is a long and hard one with ups and downs, joys and sorrows. Eugene Peterson describes it as a long obedience in the same direction. And last week, Sasi so beautifully described how on this journey, how we need this eternal perspective. That despite all our weaknesses and limitations and struggles as humans, he used this term, we are spirited human beings. At our core essence, we're spiritual beings on a human journey, not human beings on a spiritual journey, but spiritual beings. And that we've received the Spirit of Christ within us, the hope of glory. This is good news indeed. So in these past 4 weeks, we've been laying this solid foundational philosophical basis for growth and transformation. And I've been given, and we've also touched on, what does this mean practically? And I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. How should we then live in the here and now with all this truth, with God being for us, with His love for us? How can we go about our lives in healthy, life-giving ways which are honoring God? How can we center our lives to make Jesus the focal point of our heart's attention and our affection? So obviously we need a lot of God's wisdom and humility. This is an area that for 7 years I've been sort of focused on, and I did a brain dump, and I had like 20 pages of notes and quotes. I said, no, God, what do you have for us today? So let's stop and pray that God would speak to us. So Father, we do ask that you'd open the eyes of our heart this morning, that we might see and hear what the Spirit of God is saying both to us as individuals and as a community. We ask you come, Spirit of God, speak to us, reveal your heart for us. Fill us with a fresh sense of wonder and awe at the gospel of Jesus, that our lives might be more deeply rooted in him. And let it be so, Lord, for the glory of your name and your kingdom's sake. So where to begin? Maybe just by acknowledging life is not easy. It's not. We live in these soul-scorching times where there's a mad pace of life. So much information is coming at us 24/7. All our responsibilities and commitments. Many of us are feeling drained and that we're not living the lives that we really want. So how do we get off that roller coaster? When we feel like we already have no margin of life, how do we find room to really bring relevant change in our lives? I think most of us who follow Christ haven't lost our love for him. It's just we've become so distracted with so many activities and responsibilities. We become tired, frustrated, overcommitted. I know that feeling. Distraction, busyness, cluttered thoughts are one of the challenges of our time. How do we find the rest and solitude to look inward, to create self-awareness? So many of us are in survival mode, and we settle for the status quo. We're stuck in our spiritual growth and our relationship to God and one another. I would like to suggest to you that life is not lived in the fantastic, the amazing, the outrageous, the stuff we see on one another's social media posts. Yes, I have to admit, I'm one of those lurkers. I don't post much, but I'm out there watching. There's all this pressure to be amazing, and it's really hard on our souls. But you know what the good news is? Life is lived in the dailies, the seemingly everyday small stuff of life. How we're relating to our partners, our kids, our friends, our work colleagues. When we take cups of coffee, and we listen to one another, we play games. Even though Jeanette and I are empty nesters, every weekend our kids come home, and now it's V is the mole. We have dinner together, and we're trying to figure out, V is the mole, who is the mole? And what's interesting, there's interesting conversations that take place before and after. It's usually not about the mole, but other stuff of life. So think about, for a moment, the sacred ordinary of everyday life. We live in a God-soaked world in which there's wonders all around of us. God is the creator and sustainer of our lives, and yet sometimes we seem to miss him because somewhere in the midst of our busy, distracted days, there's a loving God who's pursuing us. Do we ever stop to notice? So noticing God takes intentionality and openness. He's holding out good gifts for us each day. And so what spiritual practices or sacred rhythms is all about is learning how to stop and to begin to pay attention, to begin to receive those gifts. And some of these practices have been modeled after the life of Christ. We see him in his ministry often getting up early in the morning in that solitary place, just communing with the Father. What do you have for me today? So simple ways to turn our attention to receive these gifts. I love what Henry Nouwen says about the invitation we all have to live a spiritual life that is grounded in the reality of everyday life. This is what he said: the spiritual life is not a life before, after, or beyond our everyday existence. No, the spiritual life can only be real when it is lived in the midst of the pains and joys of the here and now. Therefore, we need to begin with a careful look at the way we think, speak, feel, and act from hour to hour, day to day, week to week, and year to year, in order to become more fully aware of our hunger for the Spirit. It's a little bit of an exciting and scary thought. God is in our every day that our spiritual lives are being lived moment by moment. He continues by saying, our first task is to look critically at how we are living our lives. This requires honesty, courage, and trust. We must honestly unmask and courageously confront our many self-deceptive games. We must trust that our honesty and courage will lead us not to despair, but to a new heaven and to a new earth. Again, remembering our destination, the hope of glory. We're works in progress, but we're slowly being changed moment by moment. So the authentic spirituality is found in the nitty-gritty daily grind of our everyday lives. We can't compartmentalize our lives into work and play, spirituality, entertainment, friends, and God. It all works together. Every aspect of our lives is spiritual. Again, that's why it's been said we're spiritual beings on a human journey. We're immortal beings on this never-ending journey with the lover of our souls, God himself, present, cheering us on each step of the way. Henry Nouwen goes on to describe the process of becoming like Jesus in the midst of our ordinary lives like this. Becoming the beloved is pulling down the truth revealed to me from above into the ordinariness of what I'm thinking of, talking about, and doing from hour to hour. I love that, becoming the beloved. We need to, again, remember the start of this series, know our identity. We are the beloved, God's, the apple of his eye. And out of that identity, we can relate to him freely, coming as we are, knowing that we're loved and unconditionally accepted. One of the early church fathers described this as the glory of God, man fully alive, his spirit within us. We're being transformed, and it pleases the heart of God. He sings over us with songs of joy as we come alive to him. Now, Dallas Willard is another one of my favorite authors who's probably one of the most respected thinkers on the subject of Christian discipleship and how spiritual transformation works. And he used to say all the time, there's no problem in human life that apprenticeship to Jesus cannot solve. So in other words, when we make Jesus the center of our lives, transformation is possible. But we need to arrange our lives around the practices, rhythms, and truths that Jesus did. You know, sometimes we get the impression that Jesus was constantly running around, ministering to everyone with no time in between. Sometimes we forget, in those days, they had to walk village to village. And there's been scholars who've said it was a 2 or 3 day walk where they're camping out, cooking meals, doing life together. What was happening in those times? I can imagine them having a mud ball fight or two along the way. This is why God has sometimes been described as the God who walks 3 miles an hour. What pace are we living our lives? And when we center our lives around Jesus, it opens our lives up to God's power and the power to change, to be and live the lives we were destined for. Now, these practices and spiritual rhythms have often been described today as something called the rule of life, something that's meant to nourish us physically, emotionally, and spiritually. I know we sometimes have an allergic reaction when we hear the word rule. Like, don't place anything on me. It feels like a burden and expectation that we need to live up to. And those of us who have in the past tried to make New Year's resolutions, we know our good intentions usually don't get us very far. But a rule of life at its roots is something that began in the early monastic communities where men and women formed communities and organized their daily lives around an intentional plan to grow and mature spiritually. And the word for rule in the Greek is trellis. And what is a trellis? Trellis is something that holds a grapevine up off the ground so it can grow upward and more productively. So, in the same way, a rule of life is meant for us to become more fruitful spiritually, a kind of scaffolding to use to build the spiritual structure around our lives. Okay, because this is an important concept, I want to give you two brief definitions by two authors who have thought a lot about this. First definition comes from Pete Scazzaro in Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. He says, a rule of life is an intentional, conscious plan to keep God at the center of everything we do. We just sang about that. You're my everything. We really believe that. How do we make God our everything, the center of our focus and attention? Another helpful definition comes from Ruth Haley Barton. A rule of life is a pattern of attitudes, behaviors, and practices, sacred rhythms that we choose regularly and routinely in order to create space for God to do his transforming work in our lives. So how do we create space for God? How do we create something, a personal rule of life, sacred rhythm, that works for us? Because as Miriam said, we're all in different seasons of our life. I can remember I got married a little bit later in life, at 33. And for the first about 15 years of my Christian life, it was no problem for me to get up early, spend a time reading the Bible, worshiping an hour. It was no problem until the kids came. Changed our lives drastically. And I had to find new rhythms. And so this is the thing. I wish I would have known that you don't have to do it a certain way. There are many ways to connect with God. And I learned that sometimes all I could do was sit in a chair and listen to worship music while you're holding your little one, or take a walk. But it's more about our attitude and our openness. And I'm enjoying this season of life as empty nesters because now I have more time again. There's more spaciousness. And so one of my daily routines, and at first it felt like I had to remind myself to do it, but for the last 4 years, it's a daily walk. And I do the different things on that walk, but it's no longer a if, it's when I'm going to do it. And sometimes I miss a day or two, but I begin to realize the days that I usually miss, usually there's good stuff going on. We're traveling to visit family, but for me, that has become that one thing. Because I notice sometimes when I go on a walk, I'll feel burdened or a lot of things on my mind, thinking about priorities, what should I do? And when I return, there's a lightness, there's a clarity, there's an ability to let go of things. Because that's one of my big challenges in life, knowing yourself. I'm an achiever, and I like to have my to-do list, and I like checking all things off. And I've learned more and more I need to let go of a lot of those things and to focus on the things that are really important in the moment. So transformation is possible, but it's not inevitable. It will require you and me to arrange our schedules around Jesus, to aim our heart's attention and affection toward him as the center of our lives. And I found a couple questions that help us get to the heart of this matter, because our lives already have a center, whether we realize it or not. Sometimes we organize it around our families, our jobs, our career, education, the arts, sports, physical fitness, addictions. There's all types of things that are the center of our life. But the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do I want to live so I can be who I want to be? Who do I really want to be? And then how do I arrange my life to become that person? Am I willing to rearrange my life for what my heart really wants the most? Because if we want it bad enough, we will rearrange things. We will set priorities. But it's good to stop and think about that. because sometimes we just let life happen to us. We're responding to life instead of thinking about taking initiative. And I want to suggest to you, because sometimes we think, oh, I don't have the time, that we need huge blocks of time for this. I want to suggest that there's surprisingly simple and refreshing and sustainable things that we can do in our ordinary lives to cultivate the presence of God in the course of an ordinary day. For example, when we wake up in the morning, what do? Do you grab for your phone? Check what messages have come on? I want to suggest to allow your soul to slowly awake in the morning. It's often been said that it's a very receptive time where when we awaken, our souls are open and vulnerable. We're often aware of how we're feeling. And it's a beautiful time just to say, Lord, I need you this day. I give myself to you today. I love you. Will you guide and fill me with your spirit? I'm feeling a little bit down. Give me your perspective. Slow down when you wake up. It just takes a minute or two. The ways we begin and end our day are so critical. So often it's good to have a practice of awakening slowly, but also at the end of the day, also take a few moments. And some of you may be aware of something called the prayer of examine, something you can also do in a day. What went well? Where did I sense the presence of God? What things am I grateful for? Where did I blow it and need to ask for forgiveness or ask for God's help in an area? It also says we stop growing when we stop repenting. We need to cultivate a self-awareness. Ask God to shine His Holy Spirit into our lives and hearts. Another very simple thing that I learned much too late in life, build transitions into your life. I can remember sometimes pastoring and you have an appointment. Oh, I just need to finish this email. Can you give them some coffee or something? And then filling up the schedule so full that you're just running from one thing to the next. What a difference when we learn to build in some space in between time. I so enjoy it now when I usually have about 20 meetings a month with different people. And to prepare 15 minutes ahead, I usually take some notes afterwards because I'm learning things. I'm amazed how God is working in people's lives. And that's slowing down in between, learning to breathe a little, people watch. You know, even the secular world is catching on to this. It's like if you sit at your computer too long, you become less effective. Get up and walk 5 minutes. They've proven this type of stuff. Start moving. Build in transitions. Become fully present to one another. It's one of the greatest gifts we can give one another. Really be present. Listen to each other. We all have these sacred stories that we can learn from each other as we begin sharing our lives. Another thing as we go about our day, something called flash prayers. When you see a mother or father maybe struggling with a little one, all you have to do, Lord, send your peace. Help them stay connected. Give them your mother and father heart. The things that we're taking in, our prayers can make a difference. Something I learned, especially when I was going through very challenging times where I couldn't pray a lot, I could do a breath prayer. And so that's with your inhaling and exhaling. Breath of God, breathe on me. Breath of God, breathe on me. Sometimes we can ascribe an attribute to God. I remember one time where I was really hitting a wall. Lion of Judah, come rescue me. Lion of Judah, come rescue me. It's amazing how God became so real and live and apparent through those prayers. The one you've been dreading to hear, unplug. I've got it off. I usually keep it off and people sometimes get frustrated. My prayer is that we learn more and more to give each other room in our sacred rhythms. I remembered, especially at a certain time, my Sabbath rhythm, where I would take time for rest and downtime, was Sunday after dinner to Monday. And I would unplug. I wouldn't look at emails, and people would get upset. Where you been? Sometimes it was the elders. But you start giving the message, and they learned. We need to communicate sometimes our sacred rhythms. That was my downtime. So getting enough rest, getting enough sleep. I think it was. I hadn't taken a nap for 20 years. I thought, wow, what have I been thinking? It is so refreshing, a short half-hour nap. You wake up a different person. The thing that I have to personally watch with the phone, it's not so much the social media stuff, it's the news. I mean, we live in this broken world. There's so much injustice, so many things that are happening, so many things that can grab your heart. And what I've learned, there are ways to still take in the news and to be prayerful about it without allowing it to become an obsession. Unless your job is like Eric and he has to deal with that stuff. It's part of what he's been called to do. But there's programs. In 10 minutes, at the beginning of the day, they'll give you the top 3 or 4 stories, end of the day. But most of the time, I want to be focused on taking in the story of God. And there's a wealth of wonderful resources out there with podcasts, devotional apps, websites. You know, this church, have you checked out Right Now Media? What's on there? It's free. There's all these wonderful Bible studies, courses. If you're a small group leader, man, you've got it made. These wonderful teachers, you can sit and watch the video, ask questions. That's what I'm doing the other part of the time with these spiritual formation courses. I'm not teaching. I'm just facilitating the time, and we're talking about life. And we're sharing our perspectives. We just set some ground rules. We're not there to fix one another. We're to listen and to learn. So there's wonderful learning communities. I'll come back to that a little bit later. But you know, with the technology, what they're discovering, the brain scientists, is that it's reprogramming the neural pathways in our mind if we're swiping left, swiping right all day. And they're finding that our focus, our ability to read and to really focus is getting less and less if we're too engaged in that. It has an effect on us. And it can be a tremendous blessing. I mean, I'm using my phone for several devotionals that have been life-giving to me. And I love it because I can just listen and walk. Don't even have to look at the darn thing, and that's been one of my big things, getting outside, drinking in beauty. You know, and talking with so many people, it seems like that's one of the primary ways God speaks. It's a sacred pathway, getting out into the beauty and nature and creation. It could be riding a bike, it can be walking, and stopping and paying attention and slowing down. So how does God connect with you? Do you have that awareness? That's one of the first questions that I ask people when I'm walking spiritually, accompanying people. How does God speak to you? There's such a variety of ways. Through creation, through his word, through nature. There's whole books written on this stuff, Sacred Pathways, 9 different types of personalities. Do you know your personality? Do you know the way he normally speaks to you? As you cultivate those ways, it'll just open up a whole new world. Now, one of the big ones, and it sort of goes with transitions, is to learn to expect and welcome interruptions. Like we had an interruption last week, a fire drill. No one saw it coming, but it came to be this fun event where we saw how people responded and cared for one another. We even had some worship outside. Now, if you're like me who likes to get things done, I used to despise all the interruptions. It's like, ah. I was glad to see that Henry Nouwen struggled with the same thing, but he began to write about this and realize this, and this really helped me. It changed my perspective also. He said this: my whole life I've been complaining that my work was constantly interrupted until I discovered that the interruptions were my work. God often surprises us in those unexpected moments, and if we're open, and if we don't fill our schedules up so full, and I've come to expect we're going to be interrupted. This is part of life. It's an opportunity to respond with the grace and love of God. Another big one is this: learning to set good boundaries. And this doesn't mean saying no all the time, but it means that you usually say yes to the things that you're feeling drawn and invited into. So I don't want to give you the wrong idea. The contemplative life doesn't lead us to inaction, just looking inwardly, taking care of our own souls. It leads us to wise, compassionate action that we're drawn to, that we're gifted to, and letting go of the Messiah complex that we need to respond to everything and to rescue people. So again, tuning into the invitations of the Spirit, developing that discernment. So a large part of this is this learning to take pauses. Again, Dallas Willard used to talk about the ruthlessly to seek to eliminate hurry in our lives. Hurry is one of the greatest enemies. Now there's been new books written on how to eliminate hurry, how to create space. One of the things on one of the apps that I use, is called the Pause app. And what I love about it, you can choose a 1, 3, 5, 10-minute version. But often the 1 minute in the middle of a day is based on 1 Peter 5:7. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares for you. So it's just basically saying, Jesus, I give you everyone and everything. Show me what I need to let go of. I give those specific people and things to you. Fill me afresh with your Spirit. I need more of you. Saturate me with your love and your life. And I love the voice at the end. It says, that's good. That's enough for now. Takes 1 minute. Go on with your day. But cultivating again the presence of God. I'll just list a few more things very briefly. I think we're familiar with a lot of these things. Do you know that having hobbies and play is also a spiritual practice to enjoy life and one another? In my old age, my kids are laughing at me. I have a Merlin bird ID app. I don't know what it is about growing older, but all of a sudden you get excited about birds and ducks, and I take my walks in the park. I recognize them. I have conversations. It's great. Take pictures. Never thought I'd get into birds, but it's happened. What are your hobbies, the things that you're enjoying that are giving you life, giving you a new perspective, the wonder and creation of God? Again, times of solitude and reflection, there's times where we're to draw away maybe a little bit longer. And the weekly Sabbath, maybe you can't spend a full 24 hours. But I encourage you, we all need to rest and to worship and to delight in God's presence. And for me, even though in that 24 hours that I was using, I was doing housework. And to me, I loved just vacuuming and not thinking, and phone is off. You can do different things. The core of Sabbath is that worship, stopping, rest, delight. It's a radical act of trust and surrender, saying, God, my life depends on you. Another big one is this cultivating gratitude. Again, our brains are designed, it seems like they're wired to remember the negative, harder stuff, and they stick like Velcro, those negative impressions. But you know that the joyful, peaceful, things that we're grateful for, they've done studies that unless you think about those things for at least 10 or 15 seconds, they usually don't stick. So some people do a little gratitude journal. What is the one or two things that I'm grateful for? Gratitude opens us up to the presence of God. Worship playlists, having a list of songs that you can listen to. Lectio Divina, another way of reading Scripture. Instead of whole chapters, you can read a little passage, see what word or phrase jumps out at you, and meditate on that. The one for me that for years now is be still and know that I'm God. Because the way I'm wired, I want to go, go, go. And for me just to sit in the presence of God and not to do anything and to be open without an agenda to allow him to speak. Another one that might surprise you is this whole, how do we lament the hard things in life? How do we grieve our losses? That's also a spiritual practice. To go with what you're feeling in the moment and to wrestle with God and to bring that into his presence. And sometimes that can happen quickly and sometimes it takes more time. Almost half the Psalms are lament songs. So we can read the Psalms and with David just cry out of our innermost being, express our heart to him. And to be honest, as I've wrestled at times with these things, pouring my heart out, it's often the times I feel like I hear him the most clearly when I really get honest. And finally, we've talked a lot about the need for each other, community. And this is the thing that's been striking me as I listen to the series, that how we need one another. To have intimate allies in our life who know our story, have our back. And when we hit that wall, they'll be there for us and we can be there for them. And we've seen this community beautifully living that out in so many ways. And that's one of the things I've learned about spiritual practices. You know, I probably was like many of you where I would stop and start, I'd hear a message, get all inspired and go, and it just seemed like it was hard to really make it consistent. You know what changed all that was being in community in groups, where I'm meeting with a group of guys once a month, and how's it going with your rhythms? How's your soul? And we learn from one another in these spiritual formation groups too, just listening as we practice. So if you really wanted to make it sustainable and habitual, I would say find your learning community, find people that you can share your life with. The community aspect of our growth and development of followers of Christ is absolutely essential. I love what Parker Palmer says about this. This is the last slide. Oh no, this isn't a slide. The journey toward inner truth is too taxing to be made solo. Lacking support, the solitary traveler soon becomes weary or fearful and is likely to quit the road. Thus, the soul wants to keep us connected to the community in which we found life, for it understands that relationships are necessary if we are to thrive. Relationships are necessary if we are to thrive. So what are your dailies? What are your sacred rhythms? Maybe many of you have them already. Just a few quick tips about creating your own personalized sacred rhythm or rule of life. Start small. Be ruthlessly realistic. Pick one thing and build upon that. And then what you want to do is evaluate and see how that's working for you. And then maybe try something new. But that's one of the key. Often we bite off more than we can chew, and we get discouraged and we give up. But if we pick that one thing, make it a habit, and then we do it in community, it can really be life-changing. So I want to close by now showing you really the last slide, which is this an opportunity to join an online Sacred Rhythms course. And Crossroads has invited me to give the opportunity to take part in and lead this 6-week course where we explore some of these sacred rhythms, where we're nourishing our soul. So there's things like, what does solitude look like? What is a prayer examen? What is Lectio Divina? How can you create your own sacred rhythms that fits you for this season of your life? So at the end of the service, I'm going to be back. There'll be a small table sign-up sheet. You can also sign up on the website or emails. I just have to warn you, these courses have been filling up quick. So I'll lead one, but I'm actually hoping there might be small group leaders or other people who want to lead these type of courses, because as we connect in community, as we share our lives, that's where real growth and transformation happens.